go. Okay, whenever you're ready. If you'll just first of all give me your reaction to what the governor had to say today.
Well, I think the governor painted what I think is probably an overly optimistic picture of what we did and didn't do this session. We spent a lot of time working on the budget, and it was a really hard session in that regard. One of the reasons it was so hard is because of the choices that were made early on, not even to look at any even small enhancements to revenue, delaying tax credits or tax decreases that were in place. And as a result, there really are significant changes to the government and the services that citizens rely on. We came into this session having heard from our communities that jobs was a real issue. The budget and the revenue were a consequence of the fact that people weren't working. And so we tried our best to get that attention on jobs and to bring forward packages that we thought might help to stimulate jobs. Instead, I think the majority party spent most of the session talking about how to bash the federal government. And the only jobs bill that came out probably is the Lawyers Full Employment Act.
Hey.
Sorry.
We think that the session can, among other things, be marked by what didn't get done. And what didn't get done was passing bills that will enhance our economy and create jobs. In addition, particularly here in the Treasure Valley, the texting bill and the bike safety bills are important to people. They're really about saving lives, and an inability to pass that simple legislation is a huge disappointment for Treasure Valley legislators and their constituents. But most importantly, that somehow legislative leaders in the governor's office found time to pass over a dozen bills that basically thumb their nose at the federal government, yet were unable to find time to pass bills that really would help Idahoans. The cuts that are going to play out over the next 18 months in terms of Idaho schools, higher education, health and welfare services are dramatic, and people will start feeling them. It will affect every Idahoan, and that's a disappointment. Choices were made. Some of these cuts, the loss of federal matching funds and the cuts to educational services, both higher and K-12, will have significant effects in both the workforces of those institutions, but also in private sector. Most of that health and welfare money goes into paying for nurses' aides and home care workers. Those are people that are going to have trouble. They're going to have trouble keeping their jobs, keeping their families supported. So we think there are real consequences to the budget, and choices were made. Saying it's the best we can do, I don't think is quite accurate. Parents are going to see more crowded classrooms, longer bus rides for their children. College and university students are going to see much higher tuition and fees. And people in need are going to see less opportunities to receive assistance for healthcare and food, frankly.
Members of the majority, and Senator Davis alluded to it, have criticized and said if we had followed the Democrats' plan last year and used all the reserve money or more of the reserve money, then this budget would have been even tougher. And so, carrying that forward, if we used all the reserve money or did some of the things, then next year's budget would be even tougher. How do you respond to those criticisms that, perhaps not taking into account, a multiple-year look at the economy?
Well, I think there's a few things. One is that the revenue projections were chosen intentionally low. They've projected that there'll be no rise in revenue over the next year, right, basically?
Right.
I mean, are those realistic? I don't know. There are reserves. We did suggest using reserves, true, but we suggested using them in a manner that was pretty similar to what happened here. And before the stimulus money came through, we may have said be more aggressive up front. But when the money came through, we said, yeah, there's a reason to use stimulus. There's a reason to use the reserves. It's one-time money, though. We have to look at how we garner revenue for a 21st century economy. Many of the the tax policies we have were structured in the 1960s. Is that the economy that we have now? Is that the economy we have that we need to help replace those 70,000 lost jobs? That's what we were hoping to get some discussion about.
And what proposals that Democrats made that would help to posture our economy for the future simply were rejected this year, and that's a disappointment in terms of how we go forward. Last year, the economic stimulus money from the federal government, ironically, was what saved our bacon, and now decisions need to be made, and we need to be laying the groundwork for how this economy moves into the future. And frankly, we saw very little effort on that and taking us forward during this session.
Were you listening carefully when the governor answered the question about tax increases in 2011?
Why don't you remind us?
Well, to my ear, he was more. The door opened a bit more, and he said we'll have to wait and see after the April numbers. And and John, you're on the tax committee.
The tax committee is going to be really a hard place to try and talk reasonably about revising the tax code. But if you look at it, even if we have a great, robust growth of 5% and a 5% increase in revenues, that's what? That's $100 million, and we are down a bunch more than that. So I think that realistically, if we are to fulfill our legal requirements, both under federal and state law that we have in place, that we're going to need to look at how we generate revenue. And the other thing, I think, as important to that, though, is are we doing it the right way for the economy of the 21st century, for the jobs of the 21st century, which require greater intellectual capital, greater training, and if that's what we need for the jobs for 21st century, we certainly shouldn't be continuing to reduce our education spending.
Oh, and the governor proposed tax increases last year, you'll remember, and so it's not beyond the realm of possibility that tax increases would be proposed next year.
Now, can you say the things that like the texting bill and that sort of thing? Do you think if the session had gone longer, that might have passed?
My guess is if we'd gone longer, we'd have had the same discussion over again. The House, obviously, the majority of the House did not want to have the same degree of punishment or enforcement that the Senate wanted. Could that have been figured out if we had another month? I guess. I don't know that it would have, though, because we had really strong feelings. We ended up having 3 votes in the House, and they all weren't enough to get it done. There were some things that we did do well. I think as a pediatrician, I'm just really, really pleased with the immunization. There's 3 bills that are geared to not only maintaining a long-term funding source for immunizations for Idaho children, but also a way to see that we can increase our immunization rate, what policies, procedures, et cetera, that need to be done. I think that was a good deal. But for a lot of the public safety, health and welfare, and other public education things that we didn't do quite as well as we should have.
And these changes are going to be felt for years. The cuts that were made this year just mental health and substance abuse treatment alone, the cuts that were made are going to have ripple effects down for many years to come in terms of our criminal justice system and, frankly, public safety in Idaho.